any questions? Or are you all A-time?
Until 3 months ago, I share your optimism about steps that could be taken, steps that are short of joining or commit to join the NPT. However, some 3 months ago, I've been in Athens with some 50 representatives from the Arab states, starting from Yemen, Bahrain, Iran, a mix of civil society activists, of senior diplomats like Ambassador Sultania, which you have mentioned. And they all demand one thing: Israel commitment to join the NPT. I was asked to offer a few steps, intermediate steps that could be perceived as ICBM. Those steps are perceived by some Israeli officials as endangering Israeli security. And Shimon Stein have been with me in some forum and was objecting. Even for those steps, there was absolutely objection. People did not want to hear anything about NFU, no first use commitment, about accessing the BWC, ratification of the CWC, nothing at all. Only one thing: joining the NPT, which means, in fact, dismantling the alleged Israeli arsenal. So, sorry, but you need two for tango.
Should we take, is there any? Okay. We'll just take the, and Cameron, you had one, and then we'll.
This is more particularly geared towards our Israeli speakers. I was wondering how much debate there is in this country about taking the conference and the possible process that would emerge from a conference as a vehicle for improving the general security dialogue among Middle East countries, that is separately from the hardcore debate on chems, bios, and nukes, etc. I mean, I was wondering how much this argument, which arguably could be a positive argument from the Israeli standpoint, how much that argument weighs in the debate, if it does, if it does.
In what?
I think the only single debate I know of took place in the adjoining room, my group of us. So,
in this institute.
In this institute, exactly.
It takes you off his question.
Small question for Shlomo. You mentioned the idea of adding Turkey in this wider definition of the Middle East, and academically it sounds good. In terms of Israel's interest, it's not by chance that this present government in Turkey, the AKP government, is the one that brought it from Europe into the Middle East. And it's precisely this government that I think if you were to have an AKP-led government involved in any way, shape, or form in an arms control discussion with Israel, it seems it would be, if things weren't impossible enough, it would just be the thing that made it absolutely and utterly impossible, because they would attempt to use it to gain points in the wider Arab world on our back. Not because they'd like to, again, if the chance of its success is small and next to impossible as it is, wouldn't that just be more brownie points to a regime that frankly has made hating Israel a priority for it? Is there really a benefit to adding Turkey?
Okay, we're gonna Camille in reverse order and wrap up.
I think you're right in the starting position of many of the Arab countries. My point would be to say, first of all, engagement on this is important because basically what is, I think, critical is to enable, at a certain point, I think at the moment many Arab countries, starting with Egypt, are locked in the worst possible situation, which is that they have a fixed position, which is Israel should join the NPT, but no room for maneuver at the expert level on let's work on other ideas, the path towards this, and no room for maneuver at the political level by having a grand move from their political masters. So in a way, where I argue in favor of the conference is that I think it's a way to break that deadlock. Because basically once you're forced into a discussion, you need to stop the rhetoric, hopefully. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying this is simple. But I think, and I've experienced that in the EU events, at a certain point, when you're locked in a room for 2 days, once you've made the principal statement, you start looking at serious steps. And I've seen that happening, and suddenly you realize that the Gulf states, they are quite concerned with Iran as well. And once they are not in Cairo in building up the Arab League position, suddenly they are more interested in looking at things that would enhance their security vis-à-vis Iran, not specifically Israel. You look at the countries in North Africa. They don't have, they have an Arab League solidarity, but they also have an interest in demonstrating their good faith on other issues and things like that. So I tend to totally agree with you on the fact that that's the current situation. But my only point would be in saying that the conference and the process could help unblock that situation, which is currently very much tight around that NPT obsession by many. I want to tackle the Turkey issue because I tend to agree with Cameron on that. On the one hand, Turkey is a stakeholder in the Middle East, but I'm not sure it would be in anyone's interest to bring Turkey on board because for basically 2 reasons. First of all, you add a layer of complication. Turkey is a NATO member. It has nuclear weapons on its soil. So you're making it far more complicated for many reasons. The second thing is that the Turkish government, the current Turkish government at least, might be tempted to use that as another platform to do a good and nice Israeli bashing and side with some of the Arab regime on bashing Israel for a very limited cost as far as they're concerned. So my temptation is, when you are in a difficult situation, don't add a problem to it. So as much as I would agree that, let's say, Turkey is part of the broader scene and important in the broader scene, I would not advise on bringing them on board the zone per se, because that's making things difficult.
By that rezoning, you should exclude Israel from this.
Right, because that's definitely adding
That's adding a problem.
a big one.
Yeah, but basically Israel is part of the zone in any definition. So it's a bit like those who say it's the greater Middle East, add Pakistan to make it
Even more interesting.
even more interesting. So I would sort of stand by the IAEA definition of what the Middle East is and not make it all the more complicated, even though I agree that Turkey is somehow more relevant than Comoros to the success of the conference. But let's say I would advise caution on that.
Before moving on, Professor.
Just a question. Has the United States offered any thoughts to the Israeli government on this set of issues?
On Turkey?
No.
No.
On the whole
Everything.
concept of this conference that came out of the NPT review conference and who might attend, who might not, what could be achieved, should there be a process even if there's no
There is a follow-up
goal?
here.
I mean, what is?
We
I'm
will
just
proceed.
curious. I don't know about this.
All those questions to Sheila.
There's
Duda just wants a follow-up, and then we're going to go to Shlomo and Shlomo.
Thank you. My follow-up question is to Camille also. You mentioned and made the observation of each member or each party about his reasons and attitude towards the process vis-à-vis Layava and so on. You mentioned the large contribution of Israelis in track 2 and track 1 and so on, but you said that it is thought in the in your community, in your community, that it is thought that even if Israel would get all what it wants, it will not join, it will not, and it comes from high political levels, namely maybe prime minister. Do you have any thoughts about the reasons why these are the thoughts of the prime minister or the high level? I mean, why is that? I mean that it's not you personally, but what are the thoughts that brings you these people to think that the high-level political Israeli, the prime minister, doesn't want or do not want to go to this conference? Or it's only a guess? I mean,
no, but of course the Israeli participants are more qualified than I am to comment on the reason. I'll try to answer that. I would say, first of all, I said it was a question mark, a big question mark. I didn't say that it was taken for granted that Israel would not participate, but I've seen and heard many raise that question of would Israel participate because of the reluctance at the political level. My personal take on this is that, and this might be changing post-US and post-Israeli elections, is that it was clear in the aftermath of the 2010 review conference that in spite of what I assume was the sort of level of information and exchanges that took place between the Israeli government and the US government during the NPT conference itself, of course, Israel not being associated with the decision, the document itself for obvious reasons, that the Prime Minister, and at least I've been told that, was not happy with that outcome, saw it to a certain degree as a treason, especially in the context that was mentioned here yesterday of having no reference to Iran in the 2010 final document and having Israel singled out. So I think this is, by the way, something that I do share to a certain degree. But based on that, and based also on what is the well-known, rather bad relationship between the Obama administration and this particular prime minister, that it was assumed that it would be extraordinarily difficult either for the Americans to convince the prime minister or that the prime minister himself had very little incentive to please the American even on this relatively modest issue compared to much broader issues. I'm not sure this is still the case, and this is a question I'm framing for also the Israeli participants, because I think things might be changing on that. But I'm just sharing with you the fact that it was the reading of many, including individuals and countries that are very friendly to the Israeli position. And again, I should emphasize that it's not at all a criticism of the involvement of the Israeli government in the process, which was extraordinarily active and should be approved and applauded in many ways.
Yeah, I'll start with the last question, Turkey. I think that the nature of the regime or the nature of the government is completely irrelevant to the subject of building a regional security framework, because the whole idea of this framework is creating a forum in which parties that are in conflict have an opportunity to discuss in a multilateral forum their conflicts, on top of bilateral tracks if they exist. I don't think that one can imagine a Middle Eastern security regime in which Iran is not a partner. Is Iran a more comfortable partner than Turkey? I don't think there was a serious discussion in Israel, answering to your question, Bruno, on the ability of taking the idea of the conference and using it to start a real regional security framework. And I think that the reason for that was that we were too much focused on the circumstances or on the framework in which the decision was taken. And that was wrong for my opinion, because when I am looking backward, we were also forced to come to the Madrid conference. We, at the time, opposed the Madrid conference. We didn't like it. Was it so bad in retrospect? I don't think so. But there was no real discussions. That was the problem, that we didn't succeed, the parties didn't succeed in agreeing on the terms of reference that will be acceptable to all, because there was not enough goodwill. That's what I was talking about. Now, concerning your comment, Etan, we know what are the positions, we know what are the Israeli positions, and they are far apart. But that is exactly the reason why we have to start small, modest, include also track 2 elements in the building of this regional security framework. And to some extent, it's also an answer to a comment that was made by Camille. Certainly, the European model is better as a vision. But that is not the question. The question is what is more practical in the Middle East, not what is better theoretically.
Was enough to your question. I think that the whole issue has to be seen apropos Israel and the United States discussion on this particular issue of the 2012 goes back to the 1995 resolution, and even more so to the 2010 and the circumstances that have finally led to the decision that was taken by the conference, namely the willingness of the United States to compromise on certain understandings that were reached on the eve of the conference, which led us to believe that the United States will take a different course than it took, which kind of left us, some would go as far as to describe it as a quote-unquote betrayal. And the U.S., I mean, that was really absurd if you think of it. On the one hand, willingness to compromise on issues that it considered important for the regime, namely Iran, Syria, withdrawal and whatever, and willing to compromise and have a consensus document which did not address the real issues of the regime, and at the time going along with the decision to have that 2012 resolution. And that was something that happened within 24 hours or so, which a day later led the president and the National Security Chief of Staff, Jim Jones, to issue declarations that made, Camille, any convening of a 2012 conference impossible, because the conditions that were laid there, Israel could have signed on each and every one, and if they were to take place, Israel would have attended any conference. So the 2010 conference had left some bad blood. And I think that ever since we are in the process of containment. And the next time, well, the U.S. didn't want to deal with it. The White House had deferred that issue to State Department because at that time the key officer, Gary Seymour, said, well, take it to the State Department. Finally, they found Mr. Countryman, who is now tasked with that. And finally, when the Victoria Nuland came with that statement, again, Camille, read the statement of Victoria Nuland. Under the circumstances that she described, what would take the U.S. to agree to holding such a conference, the current circumstances and in the foreseeable future will not take place. So once again, the U.S. finds itself in a mode having to do something before 2015 because it will be held accountable. So we kind of conduct, but we have some basic problems also in our dialogue with the U.S. because the dialogue lacks some clarity, some openness, and so sometimes we go around it. So that's basically where we are, not for the first time and not for the last time. Two more remarks. You know, I would have loved to spend a bit more time, Camille, making comments on your comments. But, you know, the process that you have described is a totally different process that we are currently in. The incrementalism, the CBM, is everything that Israel stands up for. And in fact, in the course of acres, we were the students of the European model. And we said, go along, because of the circumstances, try and transform the neighborhood in a way that will make a discussion on nuclear weapon-free zone then with a background of political transformation, because such a process is not taken in a vacuum. So we were all in favor, but the Egyptians were not willing to buy onto that model because they said, Israel is trying to, in a way, simply defer the issue. Don't forget the Europeans don't have a weapon-free zone and are not likely to have a weapon-free zone for the foreseeable future. So you are not exactly a model for everything. But for that particular issue, I think that starting from a lack of trust, building confidence in an incremental manner, going from CBM to conventional arms control, and then doing other things, that is exactly the model that we thought is the one we should proceed. And on Turkey, I think that the question, definition of the region, as you know, is an issue which would be debated, but a way will have to be found because Turkey sees itself for certain issues as a Middle Eastern, for others, not necessarily. So a way will have to be found because if you take Iran, for example, as a country that will belong to such a zone for the purpose of disarmament, they will have their adjacent neighbors also somehow to deal with. So perhaps you would want to have another status of countries who will not be the core, but will be adjacent countries and will have also in one way or the other be included, but not as a high priority as the members of the to be defined. It will be a very complicated process, even if we have already reached the definition during the 90s that for the practical of a weapon-free zone, all countries of the Arab League plus Iran and Israel are members. The last word on that definition has not yet been spoken.
Thank you. I want to end with 3 points of optimism from this session. The first point is the Finnish facilitator, Leijava, who I think did excellent work as the facilitator, and the fact that the conference didn't happen is not due to him, and I think this is something that came from the work on the conference idea, and it's important. The second point of optimism is the EU seminars that the Nonproliferation Consortium ran. I think they were 2 excellent seminars, and they were built the way that they should have been built, and they were focused, I think, on this incremental approach, and they were very helpful. Track 2, or maybe they could be called track 1.5 meetings. And the final point of optimism is that the fact that the conference has been called off has energized Shimon, Ephraim Askolai, Yair, and myself to try to come up with a proposal that will somehow square the circle, and maybe be something that even our government will be able to accept. So this is the end of the conference. I want to thank everybody that took part in this conference. I found it to be a great conference, a lot of interesting discussions and debate and presentations. And that's it. Thank you to everyone.
Thank Emily for